If a cockroach is enlarged 100 times in the same proportion, what will happen? On the podium, the thin-haired teacher looked at the classroom with piercing eyes, wanting to see what the students underneath were saying. It will steal chicken. Almost as soon as the professor finished speaking, such a voice came from the corner of the classroom. Ha ha ha! Suddenly caused a roar of laughter among the students in the class. After listening to the kind-faced teacher, he was not angry. He laughed for a while, nodded and said, "This is a cockroach that has replaced your thoughts. Okay, who else has any other thoughts? The cockroach has grown 100 times bigger, and it is a few meters tall. I think a chicken is definitely not enough to eat." The students laughed again. Teacher nodded and smiled, "Yes, continue. When the body of a cockroach becomes larger, the gravity it bears will also increase. I think it may be crushed to death by gravity." That's not necessarily true, but it becomes larger in proportion, and the skeleton can definitely support gravity. The teacher was very pleased to see the students who were actively speaking, and said, "There is a concept in biology called allometric growth relationship, which refers to the biological characteristics and body shape of biological behavior, form, and energy required. There is a quantitative relationship between them, that is to say, living things will change quantitatively with changes in their body size, but this change is not proportional." While he was talking, he started to write the formula with chalk on the blackboard. This concept was first proposed by Julian Huxley in 1932. Here, it can be expressed by a mathematical formula, E70m3/4. The shape and size of living things grow linearly, and this relationship is determined by the square-cube law. That is, when the length of an organism is doubled, its surface area will be 4 times the original, and its volume and mass will be 8 times the original. Du just got lost when he heard this. To be precise, he put his spirit on a virtual panel that suddenly appeared in his mind. Du Gang, first order ancient god, a species that can grow and grow infinitely. Theoretically, as long as the energy is enough, you can pick up the stars and swallow the moon and grow to the size of a planet. Below this description is a property panel. The position on the first line, called the foundation of the first order ancient god, has been smoothly lit. In the square brackets behind it, there is a series of dim remarks, the foundation of the ancient gods. Almost when Du Gang thought about it, a stream of information emerged directly. The foundation of the growth of the ancient gods, the upper limit of the first step is 10 meters in height, which can ignore the negative impact of the human system after the transformation. The current available time per day, 10 minutes. The attribute panel is more like a skill tree. The top one is the foundation of the ancient god, and below him, there are 8 branches in the second row. Nervous system, motor system, circulatory system, respiratory system, digestive system, endocrine system, urinary system, reproductive system. At this moment, the 8 branches of the second line are all bleak. Du Gang understands that this is the reason why it has not been lit. And behind each branch, there is a remark. At the same time, there is a faint feeling in his heart that as long as he wants to, he can transform into a giant now. However, he resisted this impulse and did not dare to try it in the classroom, but opened his eyes. At this time, the biology teacher is still teaching. If this cockroach weighs only 1 gram and its volume is 1 times 1 times 1 cubic centimeter, then it only needs to bear 1 gram of weight per square centimeter of its cross-section. After magnifying it 100 times, the volume becomes 100 times 100 times 101 million cubic centimeters. If the density does not change, then its weight will increase to 1 million grams, although its cross-sectional area has also increased accordingly. But it only increased to 10,000 square centimeters. What does this mean? It means that the weight per square centimeter of the cross-section has increased by 100 times. So, if this cockroach expands 100 times, it will soon be crushed to death by its own weight. Hearing this, Du Gang frowned and raised his hand to ask, "Teacher, how can he survive when he grows larger?" Teacher smiled and wrote 4 words on the blackboard: motor system. I said that it will be crushed by its own weight. It is only the influence of the exercise system on it. In addition, the influence of other systems on it. According to the square cube law, as cockroaches grow larger, the oxygen they need also greatly increases. The increase in the surface area of the gas exchange part cannot keep up with the increase in volume. So, on the Earth, if a cockroach grows 100 times in size, in addition to being crushed to death, he will also die from lack of oxygen. Immediately afterwards, the teacher wrote the words respiratory system. Du Gang was stunned, and subconsciously muttered, "Is there a way to solve the hypoxia problem?" Teacher found him fascinated, very pleased. "You reading www.uuganshu.com?" nodded and said, "It's not impossible. If this cockroach adds more trachea and expands the amount of oxygen it can absorb, it can survive. In addition, if the oxygen content in the Earth's air rises, it can also provide it with more vitality." Scientists have discovered that in the age of dinosaurs, creatures were very huge. One of the reasons for this may be that the oxygen content in the atmosphere is very high. At this time, other students asked, "Teacher, if our oxygen content becomes higher now, can I grow taller?" Mr. narrowed his eyes and smiled and said, "If you don't consider the problem of oxygen poisoning, and you happen to be in the developmental stage and the oxygen content is increasing, then it is indeed possible for you to grow taller under the influence of this environment. In this environment, plants will grow faster, bigger, and higher than animals. Of course, in this oxygen-rich environment, our next generation will be taller and bigger." At this point, the teacher spread his hands and said with a smile, "Students, today's class will end here. Next class, we will talk about the reproductive system and the urinary system." The reproductive system, he. The students in the audience all snickered with red ears. Here, let me say one more question: what are germ cells? After students go back, please check the textbook and learn about germ cells. I will ask another interesting question for everyone to answer in the next class. Okay, get out of class is over. The students stood up and bowed, "Goodbye, teacher." Teacher nodded, turned, and left the classroom. Not long after the teacher left the classroom, a student suddenly yelled, "Look at the headlines on the phone." Du Gang originally wanted to find a place where no one was there to study the ancient system he had just acquired, but after hearing the shouts of his classmates, he didn't rush to leave, but turned on his mobile phone. Explorer 2 finally reached the edge of the solar system, but something shocking happened. Explorer 2, obviously accelerating at the speed of the third universe, but when it was about to leave the solar system, he stopped. After research, there is a film on the edge of the solar system. This film, like the greenhouse we use to grow vegetables, envelopes the entire solar system. Du Gang was stunned. He quickly glanced at the news publisher, who was the official Huiguo Space Administration. "There is no news fraud, that is to say, is this true? Are we raised in captivity?" a student shouted. Everyone in the classroom was silent, and they were all frightened by the news. Du Gang quickly opened the entire page. Sure enough, the top 10 news headlines were all related to the edge of the solar system. He clicked on one by one, checking them one by one. Famous astronomer, at the edge of our solar system, as early as half a century ago, a thin film was observed. After research, it was discovered that this thing was formed by the confluence of solar wind and cosmic wind. Moderator, then now, the Explorer 2 is set there because of what? Is it the wind? Or is it blocked by the film? Famous astronomer, don't be too pessimistic. There are many powers and possibilities that can stop the Explorer 2. Maybe it is fighting the gravity of the Sunday. Du Gang immediately clicked on the next news after discovering that this news was not useful anymore. Los Angeles Astronomical Center, the latest observations, through a special lens, found that a layer of black matter appeared near the contact point between the Explorer 2 and the edge of the solar system, but I don't know what it is yet. This black substance cannot be received by human eyes. Black matter? Du Gang frowned, and didn't quite understand what they meant by this. The picture given in the article is only a very small distant view. It was obviously taken with an astronomical telescope. Except for a professional person to understand it, he read it several times and didn't see any black matter. In his eyes, the universe is black. I didn't understand, he didn't get entangled, and directly clicked on the next news. The sun has been protecting us all the time. The reason why we humans can successfully evolve into the overlord of the Earth depends on the thin film on the edge of the solar system, which blocks 99% of the dangers in the universe. This time the Explorer 2 reaches the edge of the solar system, it is likely to open a Pandora's box and let the creatures outside the solar system find us. At this moment, after a short silence, all the students in Class 1 and 8 of high school were excited. Sentence after sentence fucking was endless, and a bunch of people laughed and talked about the destruction of the world. Students of this age, the boring class every day is the time when they are boring, wishing something would happen. You said, "Will we have a holiday?" Some classmates were a little excited and shouted loudly in the class. The people present, even Du Gang included, were a little excited. There would never be too many things like holidays. Du Gang looked through several other news and found that there was no new content, so he stood up and walked outside. Du Gang, where are you going? Asked a boy with acne not far away. His name is Mali, and he can play with Du Gang on weekdays. The two have a very good relationship. I'll go to the toilet. Du Gang didn't tell him the truth, and after a perfunctory sentence, he ran out directly. The get out of class time is 10 minutes in total. He wants to see what the ancient system is in his mind. There is an experimental building under construction in the experimental middle school. The outline has been completed, but it is a little decorated. Now it is a good place with no one. Du Gang came to this laboratory building and looked around. It was very quiet and there was no sound. It should be nobody. So, he walked directly into an empty room. Transform! He shouted as soon as he entered. Soon, Du Gang discovered that the things in front of him were short in an instant. Boom! Boom! Before he thought about the situation, his head hit the ceiling. At the same time, the school uniform he was wearing suddenly collapsed. Oh! Du Gang yelled subconsciously. Before he could think too much, he squatted down with his head tilted. The moment he just squatted down, his current situation suddenly appeared in his mind. Du Gang First Order Ancient God Current Status, Transfiguration 9 minutes and 59 seconds, this number is gradually decreasing over time. The explanation was clear at a glance, and Du Gang realized it instantly. I really have the ability to transform. For a moment, he was a little pleased, and at the same time, he bent over and stood up a little bit, came to the door, roughly gestured, the whole door frame just reached his waist and abdomen. After a little calculation, Du Gang became excited, I am more than 3 meters tall now. The door frame is 2 meters high, just reaching his waist and abdomen, so his current height is at least 3 meters. Looking at the other parts of the body again, whether it is the arms, fingers, or the details of the body, it seems to be enlarged in proportion. Du Gang watched his palm almost doubled, and tentatively patted his palm against the wall. Reading www.uuganshu.com. Boom. After a loud noise, a very wide palm print suddenly appeared on the deep concrete wall. It was 2 centimeters deep. As long as it is an individual, it can be seen that this is not a palm print that humans can have. Fuck. Du Gang looked at his hand and felt incredible. He didn't feel any pain, but he made a mark on the wall. Is this my strength too strong, or is this wall made of tofu? Although he said that, he knew from the bottom of his heart that his power had been greatly expanded, otherwise it would not be possible to make such a deep mark even if it was tofu dregs. At this time, the countdown in his mind had become 8 minutes. Du Gang thought about it quickly, and decided to deal with it. The slap prints on the wall can't just be left like this, otherwise it will be a bad thing if someone finds out. So, he stretched out his hand again and buckled it directly on the fingerprints on the wall. After his efforts, the palm print on the wall disappeared, and an irregular circle appeared in the previous position. At this moment, bell, a sharp voice came. "This is the bell for class. Restore." Subconsciously, Du Gang yelled, and immediately afterwards, his body shrank and returned to the height of 1.75 meters. Was about to run towards the classroom, and was suddenly staggered under his feet. Looking down, the shoes that originally fit perfectly have been broken. Observe again, let alone the shoes, except that the elastic underwear on the body is intact, the school uniform on the body has been stretched into strips of rags. "It's over." Du Gang wailed and stopped. The black matter at the edge of the film spreads across the solar system almost instantly. Including the Earth, they are all wrapped in black matter that cannot be directly observed by the naked eye. Is different from Nanyuan City where Du Gang is located at noon. In Trang City on the other side of the ocean, it is dark at this time. In other words, at this moment, all the places where the blue star is not illuminated by the sun began to appear one after another, space channels tens of meters in size. One by one, cockroaches with a body length of 3 or 4 meters and a height of half a meter continuously flowed out of these spaces towards the blue star. "Oh, my goodness, what is this? Gross." Tlang City, at this moment, a group of night owls wandered the street, and they were suddenly startled by the cockroaches that appeared in front of them. And the cockroach, after spotting the group of people, not only was not scared away, but like a shark smelling blood, it directly rushed on. Rubbed the ground, the cockroach, which was still 4 or 5 meters away from everyone, suddenly rushed in front of a few people. With a quack, a person's arm that was raised subconsciously was bitten off, and blood was sprayed out directly. A painful roar came out. "Fack! Fack! Fack!" Several partners were stunned by this scene, and couldn't help but burst out swear words again and again. They didn't realize at all how far the sound could be heard in the middle of the night, shouting and shouting. The cockroaches who were still wandering around almost all heard these sounds through the tentacles in front of the head. Here, the man who lost an arm, before he could scream for another second, the cockroach snapped his head with a thunderous sound. Fa, fa. The people present, in this peaceful age, have never seen this kind of battle, and all of them were frightened stupidly. How dare to help, the two timid people sat down directly on the ground, and a white and yellow thing suddenly flowed out from under the crotch. The only one who is bold, also uses both hands and feet, 3 steps in 2 steps, and flees towards the distance. And the cockroach that killed their companion completely ignored the 2 limp on the ground and the escaped guy. It started to enjoy the food on the spot, quabang and quabang, biting fast, just 4 or 5 seconds. They swallowed the upper body of their partner. Sheng, fa. The 2 were so scared that they couldn't speak clearly, and they turned into unconscious murmurs. Just when the 2 finally gathered their strength and wanted to climb away from here, the scream of the escaped companion came from a distance. At this time, there was a scene that made them horrified and desperate. Countless cockroaches resembling 3 or 4 meters long and half a meter tall in front of them are flooding toward them at this moment. Fack! The 2 of them only had time to finally spit out a swear word, and they were surrounded by the group of cockroaches. They didn't hold on for a second, and the 2 disappeared. This scene not only happened in Trang City, but happened in all places where there is no sun, and all places where space channels appeared. Did it die? Did it die? At this moment, the highest military sirens of all Eastern Hemisphere countries sounded almost simultaneously. Dark matter has filled the entire solar system, including the Earth, and the entire Western Hemisphere. There have been several space channels several meters in size, and countless monsters of different worlds have come to us. These monsters in other worlds have shown strong bloodthirsty. All the humans they meet have almost become their food. According to global satellite data analysis, these different dimensional spaces appear in places where the sun cannot reach, and they have been shifting eastward. The chief frowned and quickly said, "You mean, when it gets dark, there will be space channels, and these things will appear. Not bad. How long is China before the sun disappears?" China spans 5 time zones, and the earliest sunset is 4 hours away. The chief did not hesitate, and said directly, "Keep the notice, don't hide, let all the people return to their homes, don't run around, lock the doors and windows, this kind of thing, you can't hide it." At this moment, a representative of the think tank walked forward quickly. "On our blue star, there are 2 areas of extreme day and night. At this moment, the Arctic Circle is in a state of extreme day. Please go to the Arctic Circle for remote command." Remote command. The chief was a little angry. The whole world is gone. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. What shall I do when I go to the Arctic Circle? However, he just scolded and quickly recovered his calmness, and continued, "Notify the civilians and scientists to retreat, and go to the Arctic Circle." "Chief, what about you? I stay here, you are responsible for taking the scientists, priority retreat." On this day, news is flying all over the sky. What happened in the Western Hemisphere requires almost no official notification. The private organizations that share satellite information have already spread the news all over the world. The military department's inference also spread all over the world in an instant. Those wealthy people are doing their best. Those who have private jets will flee by private jets. Those who don't will buy the cheapest seats at the most expensive price, just to get a flight to high latitudes. Air tickets. On this day, almost all airplanes across the country were full in the shortest time, and they took off in the shortest time. All the airplanes had forgotten the so-called route and headed north in unison. In addition, almost the same thing has happened to ferries, cruise ships, and motorboats. However, compared with the fact that there are planes everywhere, basically only some people living in seaside cities can get on the boat and escape smoothly. More people still lost Fang Kun who just wanted to flee to the north. At this moment, they completely ignored the congested high speed and whether they could go, resolutely drove in the car and fled. If these people do a little calculation, they can know that 4 or 5 hours, even in a congested state, will not be enough for them to leave their respective provinces, let alone escape to the Arctic Circle. On this day, all programs were stopped, and on TV, only a single circulates an announcer to announce the news that everyone stays at home. "Xiao Gang, you stay at school, and when my mother and I come to pick you up, we will set off now and go to the airport." "Xiao Gang, there are no plane tickets, let's go take the train here." Nanyuan City is the capital of Jiangnan Province. Du Gang came here to study boarding high school. His hometown is Luoan City, a subordinate city in Jiangnan Province, which is more than 500 kilometers away from Nanyuan. As soon as the news broke, Du Gang's parents couldn't wait to go to Nanyuan to find their son. The disaster was about to happen, and at least the family had to be together. "Xiao Gang, there are no trains going south, let's find a way to drive over." On the other side of the phone, Du Gang checked it a long time ago. It was said everywhere on the internet that the highway was blocked as a dog and could not move. So he refused. "Mom and Dad, don't go on the highway. For 3 hours, even if you get on the highway, you won't be able to get here before dark." He thought for a while, and continued, "You just listen to the country, stay home, I'm on the school side, and I stay in the dormitory, not going anywhere." When Du Gang said this, his parents calmed down. "Okay, Xiao Gang, you go to the supermarket now, and move as much food and drink as possible to your dormitory." After some discussions, the 3 of them finally decided that they would not move for the time being, and they would go back and prepare the food for one night. After hanging up, Du Gang hurried to the school supermarket in a camouflage uniform on the construction site. This suit was found in the semi-repaired building. Although it is a bit small, it is at least better than running naked in underwear. Came to the supermarket, there is no boss here anymore, only 4 or 5 students who are also accommodation, are moving things. A few people glanced at each other, no one said anything, eating and drinking frantically filled the bag. Fortunately, the school supermarket is big enough, and the things that a few people took are just a drop in the bucket. It has been 3 hours since he turned into shape. Since the news exploded 3 hours ago, almost everyone in the school ran away. Although their experimental middle school is an all boarding school, most of the students are locals. Basically, they either go home by themselves or are picked up by their parents soon. Most of the people who stayed behind were students like Du Gang who came to school in other cities. Even so, some people still ran away. After loading a few bags of food and water, Du Gang immediately ran towards the dormitory with his things. He also wanted to stay in a higher floor place, but he didn't have a good place to go. Although the school dormitory had only 6 floors, he was very familiar with the environment. Arrived at the dormitory on the 6th floor. As soon as he pushed the door to enter, he saw Molly sitting beside the bed crying. "Horsepower, what's wrong with you?" Horsepower saw Du Gang appear, and while he was relieved, he cried, "My parents can't make it through." Du Gang frowned slightly, and quickly said, "You tell your parents, let them stay at home, and it will be dark in 3 hours, when the monsters will appear." His parents and Molly's parents belonged to the same unit, and they both lived in the unit assigned by the unit. The two grew up again, so there is no reason why their parents would not call his parents. Say, "My parents said that your dad went to find them, let them stay together." "Then why are you crying?" Du Gang put down his things and quickly said, "Don't cry, now follow me down to the supermarket to move things." After seeing the food and water he brought back, Molly finally woke up and stood up and followed. When the two arrived at the supermarket again, there were still only 4 or 5 people moving here, and they didn't think much about it and joined the queue directly. Soon, the two even carried their straps and took a lot of things and ran towards the dormitory. This time, when he went downstairs, Du Gang couldn't help but yelled, "Still in the dormitory, don't stay, go to the supermarket to get something to eat and drink." Although most of the students are locals, there are also many from other places. It is impossible to have only 7 or 8 of them. He guessed that these people were probably shocked, and they hid in the dormitory and did not dare to go out. Sure enough, the people in the dormitory, after hearing the shouts, went out to check, and when they discovered their actions, they all started to take action. When passing by the girls' dormitory, Du Gang went in and raised his head and shouted. When the two of them walked towards the dormitory again with their things, many students were already running towards the supermarket on the way. When these people saw Du Gang again, they couldn't help but smile and expressed their gratitude. Just like this, when most of the students who lived on campus started to carry food, the other timid students finally went downstairs and joined the queue. When Du Gang came to the supermarket again, he found a big loudspeaker. After thinking about it, he used the loudspeaker to remind him. Students who live on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floors, try to live up to the upper floors as much as possible. The locals are gone, and the upper floors are quite vacant. Live up there! After shouted, he directly set the passage to repeat. Reading www.uyugonshu.com put it at the entrance of the supermarket, and then moved to the dormitory with Molly. Du Gang, you seem to be a little different. Molly found that he was compared with Du Gang, just like a ignorant child. While he was still crying, Du Gang was already thinking about how to live, and he kindly reminded his classmates. Du Gang didn't realize that there was something wrong with him, so he replied casually, "I'm a sports committee member. It's not normal to calm down." Horsepower looked at him and suddenly said in doubt, "Wait, How do I feel that you have grown taller again? Have it. Du Gang was stunned for a moment, and then he said, if you grow taller, grow taller. It's normal when you grow up. Said, carrying a lot of things and ran forward. Finally, when the sun was about to set, all the students ran to the supermarket at least 3 or 4 times, and almost moved everything in the food area. Du Gang, who relied on his better physical fitness, ran more than a dozen times. Except for his bed with horsepower, the other 6 beds were filled with food. Some people, even as if they have lost their wisdom, are still moving things. Finally, under Du Gang's reminder, everyone returned to the dormitory. Immediately afterwards, Du Gang found a lock in the dormitory's room and locked the door on the first floor. After returning to the dormitory, almost everyone did the same thing, pulling the curtains, leaving a gap, and watching the situation outside. Without Du Gang's reminder this time, the entire dormitory building quieted down very consciously. At this time, no one wants to fight anymore, no one wants to be stupid. And the sun, under the gaze of everyone, gradually disappeared. When the last rays of the sunset faded away, under the gaze of everyone in the student dormitory, a circular space passage with a diameter of 4 or 5 meters suddenly appeared on the playground not far away. This circular channel is standing upright on the ground, and the whole body is in a whirlpool and moves inwardly. What is that? Horsepower yelled out in a low voice. He had been patronizing and crying before, but the specific situation was not sure. SHH. Du Gang gave him a gesture and whispered, cover your mouth, don't make any noise. Horsepower suddenly became tense, his hands covered his mouth subconsciously, but his eyes never left the space channel. Suddenly, his pupils shrank, and his body shivered. If he hadn't covered his mouth, he would have called out. In the distance, at the circular space passage, a huge cockroach slowly crawled out of the whirlpool. 1/2 meter high and 4 meters long body, as soon as he showed up, everyone's heart began to stop suddenly. The densely packed legs, if you let the dense phobia see it, I'm afraid you will die on the spot. After this cockroach appeared, it slightly shook the tentacles of its head. Then, it turned its direction and crawled towards the teacher's dormitory not far from the playground. The layout of experimental middle school is relatively symmetrical. The playground is in the center. On both sides of it are student dormitories and teachers' dormitories. The location where the spatial passage appeared, just happened to appear on the playground near the side of the classroom dormitory. Du Gang glanced at Molly, faintly guessing. They suspect that this cockroach can find the location of the food through its antennae. If there are people in the teacher's dormitory, it can prove that cockroaches really have the ability to locate food. Teachers usually have homes outside, and they live on campus for the convenience of making up lessons. It is estimated that no one. Du Gang saw that Molly was a little frightened and his breathing was not smooth, so he calmed down quietly. Sure enough, after hearing him speak, the horsepower was like a suffocator coming out of the water, breathing wildly. However, even if he was extremely hypoxic, he still consciously controlled his voice, for fear of too much movement to attract cockroaches. Du Gang smiled upon seeing this, and laughed in a low voice, don't worry, even if there are teachers in the dormitory, it will definitely not be that stupid. I guess I won't call out to let us verify the positioning ability of the cockroach. Before S words fell, a quiet scream that pierced the grey night sky suddenly came out in the distance. Du Gang was stunned. He didn't expect that there were really stupid people in the teacher team. Not right. He suddenly remembered that the teacher's dormitory is not like the student dormitory which has 6 floors. It is just a 2-story old house, and even the door panels are made of wood. Then, a second scream came, this time, it was a female voice. How many teachers did not go home? Du Gang is a bit bitter. He has carefully studied the news and announcements. Just an hour ago, he watched the Arctic Circle experts analyze that such cockroaches would be attracted by sounds. Just the two screams from the teacher's dormitory just now, and nothing else. At least they can hear clearly on both sides of the street where their school is located. If there are other spaces outside the school, maybe it will attract cockroaches again. At this time, Du Gang noticed that a woman suddenly ran out from the teacher's dormitory. He took a closer look, and it happened that it was Anya, the Chinese teacher in their class, a fresh graduate from Nanyuan Normal University. "Run, sir." The horsepower is the same as Du Gang, and he usually pays attention to this young and beautiful Chinese teacher who is full of weapons. At this moment, he also recognized it at first sight, and prayed in a low voice. But, in the next second, Horsepower's mouth closed again. When Anya ran halfway through the playground, behind her, another cockroach was half of her body exposed in that space passage. "It's over." At this moment, the students in the dormitory all raised their hearts, hoping that the cockroach would find Anya later. But, let everyone down, the cockroach showed enough professionalism, and as soon as the body was fully presented, the mosquito rushed up excitedly, seeing blood. But it was precisely at this time that Anya could not keep up with her cardiorespiratory and exercise abilities due to long-term lack of exercise, and her breathing was too disordered, causing her to stop and rest. "Run, teacher!" At this time, a student in the girls' dormitory next door couldn't help it and shouted. After hearing the sound, Anya subconsciously glanced backwards, and suddenly the 7 souls went to the 3 souls. She was shocked, struggling to move again. But, now it happened to have reached the limit of running fatigue of her body, her leg was soft and she fell directly to the ground. The students were all watching her at the moment, and they couldn't help but yell when they saw him upside down. In the distance, the cockroach was already very close to her, and Anya was sitting on the ground, facing the cockroach and moving towards the back one by one. But the speed at which she moves, there is no such thing as a cockroach with a bunch of legs. In just a few seconds, cockroach was already very close to her. Reading www.yuyugonshu.com. There are many girls in the girls' dormitory. Seeing this scene at the moment, they couldn't help crying. In the boys' dormitory, a feeling of grief and anger also spread. "Mr. N, run, run, yet!" Horsepower was also very anxious at the moment, his mouth was shaking. He knew in his heart that unless there was a miracle, Anya would definitely die. He had the idea to look away and dare not look. Hoo at this moment, there was a rapid and thick breathing sound in his ear. Du Gang looked at Anya with red face and red ears, breathing quickly, his heart was very tangled. "What happened to you?" Horsepower asked this as if it had opened a certain valve. "Boom!" screamed. As soon as Du opened the window, he jumped out. Du Gang! The horsepower was stunned. In weekdays, although everyone likes to talk about Anya's figure and beauty, it is not to the point of dying for her. The problem is, Du Gang is still a virgin, so he died? At this moment, Molly wondered if he was too nervous, and hallucinations appeared in his mind. But, in the next second, something more mysterious appeared. Du Gang seemed to be the King Kong in the movie. With a huge body, he stepped over 10 meters in one step and shot out in just 3 steps, just before the cockroach bit Anya. "Oh my God!" At this moment, all the students were shocked. Was not only surprised that Du Gang appeared in front of Anya, but also surprised that he was obviously twice as tall and physically taller than ordinary people. Anya stopped. She finally realized that she could not escape the monster's chase by just moving her arm. She understood that she would soon be eaten to death by this cockroach like the male teacher in the dormitory. The male teacher, she still remembers, was white, tall and handsome, and he was called Nanyuan Yanzu. "These are not important anymore, I am going to die here too. But, I haven't fallen in love yet, I haven't tried that kind of thing, and there are many things I haven't done." Han Chuang studied hard for 16 years and was admitted to the respected teacher position. It is the cardamom years, who has an infinitely bright future, but will be reduced to the food of this kind of insects. Sad. Anya has completely given up at this moment. She is no longer struggling, she understands that she can't escape, and countless pictures have begun to flash in her mind. There is a picture of crying and writing when I was young and could not do questions. When she was a teenager, she was sought after. She shook her head and smiled and rejected the suitor, saying that she is currently focusing on learning. Even when I was in college, I put on makeup for the first time, and my beauty shocked the entire college town. Landing, in these scenes, Anya feels very abruptly remembering a fragment of a big story on Journey to the West. Fairy Zixia said before he died, "The person I want is a hero, and one day he will marry me on the colorful clouds." I guessed the first, but I can't guess the ending. Why do I remember this picture? I have never been in love again. Wait, she suddenly realized that the so-called hero is not standing in front of her right now, fighting the cockroach. She blinked her eyes hard and took a closer look. A very tall giant is straddling her, blocking the cockroach attack, and is desperately protecting her. She was sluggish, and she couldn't distinguish between reality and fantasy. Someone over 3 meters tall, this is definitely not true. Du Gang looked at Anya, who fell in the dormitory. Like everyone else, he hoped that she could get up and run quickly, and that a miracle would happen that would save her life. But he instantly thought that he possessed the ancient system, which was the miracle. But, at that moment, he was very entangled. He was worried that he would become a giant and be seen by others, which would be exposed, causing unknowable consequences. He worried that even if he turned into a giant, he would not be able to beat the cockroach and would eventually become food. He even worried that he would burst his clothes when he turned into a giant and be naked in front of everyone. Even though he found 10,000 reasons for not going, he still failed to resist his conscience in the end. She is Anya, a female teacher of her own fantasy between classes, a living life, just under her nose, about to be swallowed by monsters. And I have the ability to save her. When Du Gang jumped out of the window and flew in midair to transform into a giant, all of the fear and worries in his heart disappeared. At this moment, he has only one idea, which is to save Anya. Even, in midair, he had strange thoughts in his mind. According to the square cube law, I am 1.75 meters tall. Now I am zoomed into twice the original size, the surface area has increased by 4 times, and the volume and weight have increased by 8 times. Then his own power is also magnified 8 times the original. Soon, this conjecture got some verification. He just pushed hard under his feet, and then he leaped over a distance of more than 10 meters, and in just 3 steps, he flew to Anya's front. Boom! When he arrived, he didn't think about it, kicked it out, and kicked the cockroach back several meters. The cockroach was kicked back a few meters without being able to prevent it. The next moment, it was angry. Looking at the giant in front of him, it directly tilted up, the front half of the body was aimed at Du Gang, and countless hind legs exerted force at the same time. Crush! He hit the ground and ejected directly at Du Gang, sharply opening his mouth parts, trying to kill him. At this moment, Du Gang no longer cared about nausea. Before the cockroach bit him, he directly stretched out his hand, grabbed its jaws, scratched its 10 centimeters wide leg, and threw it to the side. Boom! The cockroach was thrown directly onto the ground, but this level of attack was not fatal to it. It just shook its legs, then stood up, and charged towards Du Gang again. This time, it still chose the previous posture, ejected to start, and attacked in the air. Boom! With a sound, it stepped back to the previous ending, flew out, and hit the ground. Its vitality is too tenacious, it must be killed with a sharp weapon. Du Gang woke up, and he worked hard like this, absolutely can't kill it. The cockroach is commonly known as Xiao Qiang, and it is notoriously hard to kill. It really can't kill it with strength alone. Thinking of this, after kicking the cockroach again, he turned around and directly picked up Anya, and quickly ran towards the dormitory. The good news is that although this cockroach has many legs, it can only rely on walking, and cannot perform long-distance jumping like Du Gang did. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com was thrown away a very large distance at once. When he came to the dormitory downstairs, Du Gang did not stop, but directly under his feet, he jumped up and flew towards the 6th floor. At the same time, his body was getting smaller in midair. While lifting off, Du Gang was also adjusting his posture, changing his hands from hugging to hugging, putting Anya's arms in his arms, and then exerting force on her knees to clamp her legs. Next, the two kept Du Gang up and Anya down, head fore and feet behind, and they flew into the dormitory without hitting the window. Boom, stab, boom. The three actions of falling, sliding, and hitting the door were very coherent, and the two returned to the dormitory intact. Du Gang's clothes are once again transformed into cloth strips. He felt the tender and soft carcass in his arms, and for a while he was reluctant to let go. Du Gang! Anya reacted, struggling to sit up subconsciously, and then her cheeks flushed. At this moment, Du Gang is lying flat on the ground. Under the torn cloth strips, there are pieces of muscles like rocks. The first reaction that people look like is that they are very strong and sexy. Anya blushed quickly and quickly got up from Du Gang's angular abdominal muscles. Du Gang, teacherin. At this time, Molly finally reacted and called out. Du Gang just reacted and stood up quickly, and said with concern, Mr. N, are you okay? Anya was already panicked at this moment. Was dreaming about his hero in Sichun, but after a closer look, he found that this official was actually his student. Too ashamed. The Arctic Circle. The originally lonely extremely cold area is extremely lively at this moment, and military green tents can be seen everywhere. In addition, many people dig ice caves under the command of a group of officials. Here, the tent alone can freeze people to death. In the absence of a thick stone house, the ice cave can also be used as a place to keep warm, at least able to shield the cold wind. The high-level leaders of the Eastern Hemisphere almost all came here, but they all had a tacit understanding. There was a certain distance between the camps. The command center of the Hua State Camp. There are 13 space channels within the Anzong military region. Under the command of Chief Yang Xiaotian, they have all been controlled and a fixed line of defense has been established. It is certain that as long as the bugs appear, they will die. Good job! Yao Zhenqiu slapped him. At this time, there is such good news, which is really worthy of joy. What about other military districts? There are 55 provincial-level military regions, 835 training bases, and 1,500 underground secret bases in the country. Among the provincial military districts, 44 military districts have successfully controlled the space channel to ensure that the worms cannot spread. What's the situation in the 11 military districts? These 11 military districts are still fighting because the space channels are too dense. The 853 training base suffered heavy casualties due to insufficient equipment and strength. The secret base has not been invaded by Zergs because it is underground. It is intact. Yao Zhenqiu's expression became solemn. The existing equipment of mankind is made to fight against mankind. Ordinary guns and bullets can't pose too much threat to this kind of carapace. Only the kind of heavy-powered cannonballs can really effectively kill the black beetle. People in the scientific research department have temporarily named the cockroach as the black beetle. Nowadays, if the problem of insufficient power of guns and weapons is not solved, it is difficult to send troops to regain lost ground. The officer continued, in addition, we have now lost contact with the Chinese side. The preliminary judgment is that the black dark matter affected the signal. Isn't the satellite still usable? Yao Zhenqiu looked at the real-time satellite image on the computer in front of him, wondering. The officer explained, satellites are indeed usable, but China can no longer receive any signals, even the super signal tower we built underground before. Yao Zhenqiu nodded. I see. How are the casualties now? Because we have warned through the TV media in advance, most of the residents in our country have stayed inside the house, and the casualty situation is much better than that of the Western Hemisphere countries. However, the people who gather on the highway are basically. It is not necessary for the officer to expressly say, those people think it is more ill-fortune. Pay close attention to the situation in various places, and report to me at any time if there is any development. Nanyuanken Experimental Middle School. At this time, the Space Channel appeared. Half an hour had passed. 8 beetles emerged from the channel in the playground. Except for one of these beetles, which was still wandering in the teacher's dormitory, all the others were gathered here. Downstairs in the student dormitory. Boom! 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 The black beetle that fought with Du Gang, as if he knew that he could go upstairs after entering through the door of a human building, kept hitting the iron door on the first floor with his head. Every time rang, the students upstairs trembled. It is precisely because it is constantly making sounds that other black beetles are also gathering here. In addition to the door of the male dormitory, under the door of the female dormitory, there are also black beetles hitting the iron door. The 601 dormitory upstairs is already crowded with students at the moment. This is the dormitory where Du Gang lives. Since he showed his power, the students spontaneously ran over, as if staying with him, they felt very safe. Du Gang, think of a way, the door downstairs is not strong. At this time, no one has the intention to ask Du Gang why he can grow bigger. Everyone knows that he is very powerful and can fight giant cockroaches. They all regard him as the backbone. Du Gang was looked at by so many expectant eyes, and he was also a little anxious. What can he think of? There are only 7 minutes left to transform, and the reset time is 12 o'clock at night, and there are 4 or 5 hours left. His power has indeed increased many times, but he can't even break the beetle's defense, unless he has some weapons. Du Gang quickly said, "Are there any sharp weapons? My transformation time is limited. Although my strength is very strong, I can't kill these beetles in a short time with my fist. Do you know if there is a weapon suitable for me to use after transformation?" When these words came out, everyone immediately began to think. Soon, Molly said, "I know where it is. There is a steel pipe at the end of class 7. I often see them playing with that thing after class." Du Gang shook his head, "It's too short and too thin to use. If it is solid, it is estimated to work, but he has seen the steel pipe that Molly said. It is hollow, and it may be discounted by a dozen beetles." Soon, someone suggested, "Can the kitchen knife in the cafeteria work? Cooking knife?" Du Gang thought about it, but didn't rush to deny it, and continued to ask, "Anything else? It's better to be bigger and harder." "I know." A boy outside the door called out. Everyone immediately gave him a place. He hurriedly walked in. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com quickly said, "The newly built laboratory building of our school has an extra steel column, which is very thick and 3 or 4 meters long." Du Gang suspiciously said, "Is there? Why don't I know?" Today, he went to the laboratory building to test his transformation between classes, and after the end, he found a set of workers' camouflage uniforms in the laboratory building. In his memory, there were no thick and long steel pillars. Seeing Du Gang's unbelief, the boy quickly explained, "On the roof of the experimental building, I was sitting on the steel pillar last night." Without waiting for Du Gang to question, other students asked curiously, "Why did you go to the top of the laboratory building yesterday?" "I went with my girlfriend." The boy's voice became lower and his face flushed. The 3 or 4 meter long thick steel column, Du Gang judged it slightly, and felt that the weapon could be used. Then he said, "Okay, everyone, you are waiting here, I will go to the laboratory building to fetch that thing." After speaking, he opened the window again and jumped up. Before he could jump down, Anya said with concern, Be careful. Du Gang was a little moved when she heard this, but he still suppressed the restlessness in his heart, nodded slightly, and jumped out directly. The black beetles under were all excited when they saw a food jumping upstairs, and they stood up and wanted to take their first bite. Transform. Unfortunately, I disappointed them. The person in the air turned into a giant more than 3 meters high in midair. After stepping on a black beetle, he jumped on the spot, started the catapult, and jumped more than 10 meters away. Jumped towards the direction of the laboratory building. Suddenly, all the black beetles gave up the behavior of hitting the door and chased them in the direction where Du Gang disappeared. After Du Gang left with a group of black beetles, a long time later, the people in the dormitory breathed a sigh of relief. These cockroaches are finally gone. It can be seen from the expressions on everyone's face that they are much more relaxed. It can be seen that the cockroaches are very stressful for everyone. You said, how did Du Gang do it? Because the cockroach had been smashing the door underneath before, no one dared to ask sensibly. Now that Du Gang is gone, someone finally couldn't help but say it. Yes, his body became bigger all of a sudden, and his strength is also very large. He jumped straight down from the 6th floor, and there was nothing at all. For a while, the whole dormitory became lively, and everyone seemed to be venting their fears before, and they started talking. You said, is it related to this doomsday? There is no shortage of those present who love to read novels on weekdays, and suspect that Du Gang has acquired some supernatural powers. When these words came out, everyone became excited. If this is the case, then they will have a chance to get the ability. It's very possible. Before, none of us had seen Du Gang grow older. It was just the first time we saw him. Maybe he just awakened. Yes, if Du Gang comes back in a while, we must ask what is the situation with his ability. Some people have long wanted to ask Du Gang's abilities, but they dare not ask, and now they just make this question what everyone wants to know. Seeing these students, Anya is not very big, but she has a lot of thoughts, and she is a little unhappy, and she bluntly said, okay, the cockroaches are gone, you guys go back, there are too many people here, too boring. Hearing what she said, everyone felt that the air here was full of heat waves, and there was even a smell of rotten athlete's foot. It's really too hot, I'll go home first, see you, Mr. N. I'm going back, too, goodbye Mr. N. Although Anya only took 2 classes, the students here basically knew her, so they greeted her before leaving. When all the students left, Anya looked at Horsepower strangely. Teacher, I live here. Du Gang and I live in the same dormitory. Oh, it's okay, I just saw you blushing a bit, are you okay? After Molly heard it, his face was really red, and he stammered, no. It's okay, teacher, I'm just a little hot. It's all right. Anya replied casually, her mind is not here. Compared with the students who want to know where Du Gang's power comes from, she hopes Du Gang can return safely. Before the end, she looked at Du Gang, she was just an ordinary student, at best a sunny boy. However, after passing through the fantasy of a heroic hero in the playground, she is now a bit tangled. She hates why she is Du Gang's teacher, and feels a little shameful that she even thinks of something like this. He is still a kid. Ugh. Anzong Military Region. After all, this is the largest military area in China. After almost half an hour when the surrounding space channels appeared, they were all controlled. There are a large number of artillery and laser equipment on the periphery of the 13 space passages here, enough to make any bugs come out and die. Reported, scientific researchers found that this black beetle had a crystal in its body, which contained very special energy. Yang Xiaotian took the photo and saw that it was a spherical crystal the size of a fingernail, with a crystal clear surface, but inside it, there was a red spot that looked extremely dazzling. What kind of energy? According to their preliminary estimates, it may be related to dark matter, but the specific situation will have to wait for many experiments to know. Yang Xiaotian nodded, and continued to ask, have you been in contact with the Arctic Circle? No, the equipment is okay, but it just can't transmit signals. Experts inferred that it may be related to dark matter. During the day, not all the experts have left. There are still many scientific researchers who voluntarily stay in frontline positions. After Du Gang jumped on the top of the experimental building, he quickly saw the steel pillar. The classmate said, is a steel column 20 centimeters thick and 3 to 4 meters long? Or taiju? He couldn't tell the specific material of this thing, but the tempered glass roof next to it was supported by this kind of pillar, and it seemed that the quality was not too bad. Before he could think about it, he bent over to hold it and lifted it up, exerting a slight force. The pillars are not deformed. Good quality. He gave a compliment. Although he hadn't measured his strength in detail, according to previous inferences, it was at least 7 or 8 times larger. After getting the weapon, Du Gang didn't think too much anymore. He leaped downstairs and faced the black beetle that was climbing in the distance. He raised the pillar in his hand and waved it at the fastest bug. Boom! After a loud noise, the black beetle was caught off guard, and 7 or 8 sturdy and spiked legs were directly broken off, and its body was also heavily hit on the ground. On the back carapace of the black beetle, a deep crater suddenly appeared like a meteorite hitting the ground. At the same time, a burst of dark green blood splashed out directly. Squeaky! The black beetle seemed to be very painful, and it cried continuously. After Du Gang found the effect, he was delighted, and quickly took advantage of the victory to pursue him, waved the pillar, aimed at the black beetle's head, and slammed it down again. Boom! Boom! This time, Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com is not only the sound of a pillar colliding with a black beetle, but also a sound of a pillar colliding with the ground. The black beetle's head was directly smashed by Du Gang, and green blood flowed all over the place. Kill 1. At this time, the other black beetles also arrived, and all leaned forward, trying to charge him. Du Gang saw this, made a little bit of his feet, tang. He bounced again, and jumped onto the roof. I saw him staring at the insects underneath. Although his face was splashed with some green blood, there was excitement that could not be concealed. Cool. Killing seemed to arouse the violent factor contained in the depths of his genes, causing his blood to boil a little. After hitting the target, Du Gang shouted kill, and then jumped down from the stairs, holding the pillar and slamming it towards the head of the black beetle. After having the first experience, this second time, he aimed directly at the head and attacked. After gravitational acceleration, the power brought by this heavy blow is even more than 3 points before. Boom! With a sound, the black beetle's head directly turned into a green blood mist, and the dead could no longer die. After succeeded again, he was not reckless. Push his feet harder and jump back to the top of the building again. Although there is not much time to transform, it is more than enough to kill these black beetles. That's it. In less than 3 minutes, the 8 black beetles chasing over, all turned into decapitated corpses, went all over the place. What surprised Du Gang secretly was that these black beetles, even if only the last one was left, still did not have any fear or emotions, and did not have any movement to escape. They maintained their extreme desire for him. After finishing the 8 black beetles, Du Gang was restored to his full size. Just about to go back, he found that among the black beetle corpses, there was a ray of red light gleaming in a piece of green oil. What? He frowned and looked away, looking like a gem. Gems? Suddenly, he guessed that this thing might be what is often said in the novel, monster crystal or golden core. Transform. Du Gang snorted, transformed into a giant again, and walked carefully, passing by a few bugs, without any movement. Before he came to the gem, he reached out and picked it up. One source can be crystallized, is it absorbed? A systematic electronic sound rang from his mind. Du Gang suddenly relaxed his vigilance, and said silently in his heart, "Absorb." The red crystal the size of a fingernail in his hand disappeared. Absorb 1 red source energy crystal to get 3 points of source energy. 3 points source energy. Du Gang smiled, and finally found the source of energy needed for the system upgrade. Thinking of this, he immediately got into action, and found among the corpses of the other 7 black beetles. Didn't waste too much effort, easily found 7 red gems in a piece of green blood. 7 red sources are detected to be able to crystallize. Is it absorbed? Absorb. Absorb 7 red source energy crystals to obtain 18 source energy points. During the absorption process, Du Gang discovered that the source energy contained in these source energy crystals is more or less, the more has 3 points, and the lesser has only 1 point. The good news at least is that these bugs have source energy, and I can get source energy by hunting and killing the bugs. Du Gang looked at the balance in the Yuan Neng column in his mind, showing 21 o'clock, a little excited. Although there is still a long way to go before upgrading to a second-order ancient god, the activation of the nervous system, the first system on the second level of the skill tree, is already very close. He can activate the nervous system as long as he gains 79 more source energy. He understood that his state of transforming into a giant was like a mech that had just left the factory without any weapons. And those 8 secondary systems must have different functions after activation, but I don't know what kind of abilities the nervous system can bring to him. After absorbing the source energy, Du Gang put down the deformed pillar, recovered his true form, and quickly ran towards the boys' dormitory. There are only 2 minutes left to transform, and he can't use it up before 12 o'clock, otherwise there will be some sudden situation, and even the opportunity to struggle will be gone. Arctic Circle Hwaguo Camp Command Center. A scientific researcher, with joy on his face, quickly ran to Yao Zhenqiu and quickly reported, "Great head of state, good news." "Say it." Seeing him so excited, Yao Zhenqiu quickly responded. "There is a time zone in the Western Hemisphere. After the sun appeared, those spatial channels disappeared." "What?" Yao Zhenqiu got excited at once, and asked excitedly, "Did it disappear forever? Where are the bugs? Have they disappeared too?" The researcher was taken aback when asked, and said in embarrassment, "Whether it will disappear forever? I'm not sure. I have to wait until tomorrow night to see if there will be a space channel on their side." Yao Zhenqiu suddenly showed disappointment on his face. Upon seeing this, the scientific researcher hurriedly said, "The great head of state, although the bugs have not disappeared, we have found through satellite images that those bugs have shown great incompatibility. They are very afraid of the sun. When the sun appears, they basically all penetrate. I reached a place out of the sun, and fell asleep. Afraid of the Sunday. I fell asleep." Yao Zhenqiu uttered a few sentences and continued to ask, "How well do they sleep? Can they be awakened? Also, what are they like under the sun? There is no specific example yet, so I can't judge for the time being." After the researchers left, a communications sergeant stepped forward to report. "Our fighter planes have successfully arrived at various military districts, and related information has been delivered. Currently, they are temporarily suspending supplies at various bases. They will take off and return to life in about 3 hours." "Very good, notify the flight department, 1 round 12 hours, to deliver information to the military regions." Suddenly, Yao Zhenqiu paused for a second or two before continuing, "During the day, you can send a transport plane back. Forget it, wait for my order after seeing the specific situation during the day. Since we know that bugs are afraid of the sun and sleep during the day, then daylight is a very good safe time. Whether it is transporting supplies or mobilizing people, it is a very good time." When Du just walked downstairs to the dormitory, all the students cheered. Fortunately, everyone's celebratory voice stopped under his hiss. He came back, but the bug did not come back, which shows that he succeeded. At this moment, many students cried with joy, hugging each other to celebrate the joy. When it is peaceful, they are always hoping for something to have a vacation. But when the end really comes and the family members are blocked from seeing each other, they hope that all this is fake. Du Gang took advantage of his power doubled after getting bigger, and then took off. He quickly reached the window and resumed the operation, and returned to his 601 dormitory smoothly. How? Although they can already guess the ending, Anya and Molly still look at him expectantly. Du Gang nodded and smiled. A total of 8 cockroaches were killed by me. Great! The two cheered, and Anya blushed again. In this battle, the clothes on Du Gang once again turned into cloth strips, and the distinct abdominal muscles showed endless. Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Horsepower did not notice this detail, and said excitedly, "I'll go and tell the people in other dormitories." After he finished speaking, he ran out, leaving behind a pair of lone men and women. It was okay when he was there, Du Gang didn't have much feelings. But, when he and Anya were in the dormitory, Du Gang was also a little restless due to Anya's shy performance. His heartbeat kept accelerating, which was almost 3 points faster than when he was fighting with insects before. 3 or 4 seconds passed. Unlike Du Gang's passive appearance, Anya is older after all. At this moment, she has forcibly put her shy away, pretending to be calm and said, "Du Gang, you have some bug blood on your body, teacher. Wipe it for you." The word teacher is bitten a little harder. It seems to imply that Du Gang is a teacher, and it seems to be saying to myself that I can't think about it and lose my ethics. After speaking, she walked to the door, took off a relatively clean towel, came to Du Gang, and wiped it up for him. Du Gang grew up and has never even touched a girl's hands. How could he have experienced this kind of battle? He lowered his head to watch Anya's concentrated appearance. His abdomen was hot, and a wave of blood surged to his head. Fortunately, although his body is restless, his reason is still there, and he dared not move, so he stood quietly. Suddenly, Anya asked, "Du Gang, you are almost 16 years old this year." Du Gang was shocked, nodded, and replied, "Yet. Has it been your birthday?" He was a little puzzled. He didn't know why the teacher asked so. He shook his head and said, "No, my birthday is August 8th, and it's only a month away." After getting the answer, Anya stopped talking and concentrated on cleaning up the green blood on Du Gang. Nanyuan Experimental Middle School is a relatively good school, and the teachers' salaries are not low. Most of the teachers have houses in the local area. Except for Anya, the person who is known as Nanyuan Yanzu is really in the dormitory. The other teachers just occupy the dormitory and use it as a place for students to take a break at noon or after school to make up lessons. After making sure that there was no one on the teacher's dormitory, Du Gang was not going to go out. There are only 2 minutes left for his transformation, and the black beetle has been drilled out of the space channel outside. And there are still more than 3 hours before the time to regain his transformation. It is impossible for him to take risks anymore. So, after quietly informing everyone, the whole dormitory building became quiet. The female dormitory building next door has always been quiet. Although they have seen Du Gang's bravery and strength, he is not on their side, and no one dares to speak loudly without a sense of security. Especially when the space channel crawls out of the bug again, the female dormitory is quieter. 1 o'clock in the morning. More than 4 hours have passed. As early as 12 o'clock, Du Gang had counted the number of insects that came out of the space channel to 38. By now, there are 50 or 60 insects that have crawled out. The good news is that the smell of these bugs is not as powerful as expected, and they did not smell the food in the dormitory directly from the playground. At the same time, many insects were attracted by the screams, car crashes, explosions, and gunshots everywhere in the city, and they scattered. The bad news is that there were a few bugs. When passing by the dormitory, they smelled the food upstairs and stopped. Boom! 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 The impact of insects downstairs was endless. Attracted by this sound, more than a dozen insects that hadn't gone far turned back. They also found the food upstairs, and they all stayed there. Fortunately, the door of the dormitory building is not wide enough, it can only be impacted by a bug at the same time, otherwise it would have been knocked open long ago. But this violent slam on the door was still like a big rock, pressing on everyone's heart, unable to let it go. The boys who had returned to their dormitories once again gathered near room 601. Only here, only the powerful Du Gang can bring them a sense of security. Seeing everyone's expectant gaze, Du Gang frowned. His transformation time has recovered, and there is no time superimposition as he imagined, it is still only 10 minutes. There are more than a dozen insects under. If you save some time, it is almost enough to kill them. However, it is only 1 o'clock in the morning, and there are still 23 hours before tomorrow, when it will be transformed again. In that space channel, although not many insects came out every time, there were nearly 50 insects after 3 hours. Who knows how long this channel will exist and whether it will remain forever. If he is alone, he is confident that he can survive, but now, there are more than 20 people in the male dormitory here, all of whom look at him as the savior. He really can't bear to escape alone like this. Let's take one step at a time. Du Gang said from the bottom of his heart. He didn't know if he could guarantee not to give up this group of people when the danger really came down, but now, it hasn't reached that level. Thinking of this, he slowly said, "Everyone, come downstairs with me." Downstairs. All the students panicked and looked at Du Gang in horror, not understanding what he meant. A boy said anxiously, "I don't have the ability to transform like you. I won't go down. Those bugs are too terrifying." The others immediately followed, "That is, you can transform, but we can't." They all thought Du Gang wanted them to fight together. Hearing these words, Du Gang's heart was cold, and he was a little unhappy. However, seeing horsepower in Anya, although he was also terrified, but he looked at him firmly, and suddenly felt a little relieved, so he bluntly said, "I am not asking you fight against bugs, you go down with me, move something downstairs, and block the door." After finishing speaking, he took the lead and walked downstairs. The others consciously separated a road, but no one moved. When he reached the top of the stairs, Du Gang could tell through the sound of footsteps that none of these people had moved, so he looked back at them and said coldly, "You just want to wait for me to do it. Do nothing by yourself? I tell you. It's my nostalgia to save you, my kind heart. If I don't save you, I jump out of the window and run away now. What can you do? I urge you to think clearly." After finishing talking, he didn't care if everyone was following or not, he walked directly downstairs. Sure enough, as soon as the voice fell, Anya and Molly moved first and followed quickly. The others stared at each other together, and scattered people followed. However, there are still so many 6 students standing there indifferently. A dozen people have gone down, the door is so big, it should be enough. Yes, if we go down, it may affect them to move things. These 6 students, UU reading www.uuganshu.com consoled each other at this moment, looking for a lot of excuses to convince himself not to go on. Of the 6 students, 3 of them are classmates of Du Gang before. Even when other people went down to the 2nd and 3rd floors, Mahaban, the health committee member who had a good relationship with Du Gang before, whispered, "Who knows if these bugs were brought by Du Gang? Everyone is ordinary people. Transformation, do you think he has a problem?" The others were a little apprehensive, they didn't dare to take this sentence, and they were all silent. Mahaban saw no one agrees with him, and was a little worried, so he induced, "Unless all of us can transform, we can become giants." After seeing the changes in the expressions of the people, he continued, "If we all become giants, let alone blocking the door, we are fighting those bugs, I'm willing, what do you think?" As soon as these words came out, they successfully aroused everyone's desire for power, and finally agreed. If I could become a giant, I would dare to fight those bugs. Yes, if I were a giant, I would be braver than him. When arriving on the first floor, Du Gang did not rush to do anything, but turned around, and when everyone arrived, he said, "Count how many people, horsepower, you use your mobile phone to remember the name that came down with me." At this time, power is the right to speak. No one dared to question what Du Gang said, and no one dared to ask more. Was busy reporting his name to Mali, while secretly happy in his heart. Although I don't know what Du Gang wants to do, these people are definitely better than the ones above. Some people even had some faint thoughts, suspecting that Du Gang might abandon those people upstairs.